All right, so we're going to continue our study today, beginning at Matthew 26. We've completed up to 56. Today, we are going to witness the trial of Jesus. Right? We have seen in our last study how Jesus had prayed, the agony that he went through in the Garden of Gethsemane, and then how he was betrayed by his own disciple, and then he was arrested. And now what happened after his arrest? Where did they take him? What happened there? All of those things we're going to see, right? And so can we just do from Matthew 57 to 58, just two verses, 57 and 58.
యేసును పట్టుకొనిన వారు ప్రధాన యాజకుడైన కైపా యొద్దకు ఆయనను తీసుకుని పోగా అక్కడ శాస్త్రులను పెద్దలను కూడి ఉండరు. పేతురు ప్రధాన యాజకుని ఇంటి ముంగిట వరకు ఆయనను దూరము నుండి వెంబడించి లోపలికి పోయి దీని అంత మేమవును చూడవలెనని ఒంట్రోతులతో కూడా కూర్చుండెను.
Okay, so here we see that Jesus was taken to Caiphas. Who was Caiphas? That was his name, but he was the high priest. He was the head of the Sanhedrin. Sanhedrin means a council of 70 members. They were the highest religious governing body of the Jewish nation. Okay, so, but what Matthew does not record, like I said, this story is recorded in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Right, and so we are going to see some aspects that were not mentioned in some other gospels, so that we don't miss anything. Okay, and so the account of John we're going to see. So can somebody go to John 18 and see from 12 to 14?
అంతటా సైనికులను సహస్రాధిపతియు యూదుల బంట్రోతులను యేసును పట్టుకొని ఆయనను బంధించి మొదట అన్న యొద్దకు ఆయనను తీసుకొని పోయిరి. అతడు ఆ సంవత్సరము ప్రధాన యాజకుడైన కైపాకు మామ. కైపా ఒక మనుష్యుడు, ప్రజల కొరకు చనిపోవుట ప్రయోజనకరమని యూదులకు ఆలోచన చెప్పినవాడు. సీమోను పేతురును మరి ఒక శిష్యుడును యేసు వెంబడి పోవుచుండెను. ఆ శిష్యుడు ప్రధాన యాజకునికి నెలవైన వాడు గనుక అతడు ప్రధాన యాజకుని ఇంటి ముంగిటలోనికి యేసుతో కూడా వెళ్ళెను. పేతురు ద్వారమునొద్ద బయట నిలుచుండెను గనుక ప్రధాన యాజకునికి నెలవైన ఆ శిష్యుడు బయటికి వచ్చి ద్వార పాలకురాలితో మాటలాడి పేతురును లోపలికి తోడుకొని పోయాను.
Okay, thank you so much. So what John gives us is a further detail. Before taking to the Sanhedrin, before taking to Caiphas, actually Jesus was taken to another person, Annas, right? He was taken to Annas. Annas was a retired high priest. Okay, and so he was, but in those days, you know, they had a patriarch in the family. So it was a high priestly family. And in that year, the one that was serving as the high priest was Caiphas, right? That would change each year. But that year was Caiphas, and Caiphas was the son-in-law of Annas, right? And so they were all in the priestly family. And so this Annas was the high priest some time ago. The people who arrested Jesus first took him to Annas before even taking him to Caiphas. Annas had a lot of experience with these kind of situations. He knew about this situation. Now, what is the situation that they needed to do? They arrested Jesus, and in our justice system also, when you arrest somebody on a certain charge, what is the next step that you have to do after arresting somebody? You have to take him before a judge, correct? And then you have to approve your charge before the judge. So that was the next step here. And the Caiphas and all of them, they were the judges. The Sanhedrin was a judge. But before that, they wanted to take to an experienced person like Annas so that he will help them to build a case against Jesus. Right? He will help them to build a case against Jesus. Now, Annas, and so they tied Jesus' hands at the back and they pushed him. There was a big mob that was gathered around. All of those people were the friends and the well-wishers of the priests, and all of them who hated Jesus. All that were troubled by Jesus, all of them gathered there. The priests, the rulers, all of them took Jesus as a prisoner from the Garden of Gethsemane to the house of Annas. Right? Remember, this was in the night, midnight. Right? They woke him up and they said, we need your help here. Annas knew exactly what was going on. He knew exactly who Jesus was. And so he wanted to understand how he can build a case against Jesus. It was not easy to build a case against Jesus. Now, they did not want a case where he is some kind of a misdemeanor or a petty crime here and there for which a small punishment will be given and then let go. What did they want to do with Jesus? They wanted to kill him. They wanted to legally put him to death through the legal means, because they were not able to harm him otherwise. There were disciples, he was a huge following and everything. And even now, why did they have to go that very night? They could have put him in prison and gone the next day. They knew that if the news of Jesus' arrest spreads in Jerusalem, Jesus had many followers and they would come and disrupt the whole plan. And so they took him directly to Annas. What did Annas do? He asked him some questions, right? And then he said, we'll continue to read in John 18. Can somebody read John 18, 19 to 24? 19 to 24.
ప్రధాన యాజకుడు ఆయన శిష్యులను గూర్చియు ఆయన బోధను గూర్చియు యేసును అడగగా, యేసు, నేను బాహాటముగా లోకము ఎదుట మాట్లాడుతుని యూదులందరూ కూడి వచ్చు సమాజ మందిరములలోను దేవాలయములోను ఎల్లప్పుడూ బోధించుతుని రహస్యముగా నేనేమియూ మాట్లాడలేదు. నీవు నన్ను అడుగనేలా? నేను వారికేమి బోధించినది విన్నవారిని అడుగును. ఇదిగో నేను చెప్పినది వీరెరుగుదురని అతనితో అనెను. ఆయన ఈ మాటలు చెప్పినప్పుడు దగ్గర నిలిచి ఉన్న బంట్రోతులలో ఒకడు, ప్రధాన యాజకునికి ఇలాగ ఉత్తరమిచ్చుచున్నావా అని చెప్పి యేసును అరచేతులతో కొట్టెను. అందుకు యేసు, నేను కాని మాట ఆడిన ఎడల ఆ కాని మాట ఏదో చెప్పము, మంచి మాట ఆడిన ఎడల నన్నేల కొట్టుచున్నావనెను. అంతటా అన్న యేసును బంధింపబడి ఉన్నట్టుగానే ప్రధాన యాజకుడైన కయప యొద్దకు పంపెను.
So, what Annas wanted to do here, he wanted to try two things. First thing, you have to prove that Jesus broke the law of the Jews. Second thing, you have to prove that Jesus broke the law of the Romans. Why? Because it was not sufficient for him to break the law of the Jews, because the Jews could pass a sentence, but they cannot implement that sentence. They did not have the authority. They needed the ratification, or they needed the stamp of the Roman authorities in order to carry out any judgment. Right? And so he was trying two things, Annas. He was trying two charges. One charge was blasphemy, which is speaking against God. One charge was sedition. You know what is sedition? Sedition is speaking against the government, speaking against the country. Right? Any anti-national activities, anti-government activities are counted as sedition. And so he wanted to prove the charge of blasphemy so that he would stand as an accused among the Jews, that he spoke against God. And also he wanted to prove something, and this second thing was very, very important, because unless this second thing is proved, the Romans won't be interested in this case. That is, that he spoke against the government of Rome. Right? Now, in all the teachings of Jesus, do you find any instance where he spoke against the government? What they were trying to establish is that Jesus had some disciples, and Jesus meets his disciples in unknown locations, in hidden places, and he keeps talking about a kingdom. And that's so he is plotting something against, to create a secret society, to create a revolt against the Jewish people, to set up an alternate kind of a kingdom, right? And so they are trying to piece together some evidence in order to bring the charge of sedition against Jesus. And what was Jesus' response to that? He said, have I done anything in secret? You're saying I was doing something in secret, and so I'm planning a revolt and I'm planning an alternate to this government. But what was Jesus' reply? I spoke openly to the world. Did Jesus teach in secret at any point of time? I spoke openly to the world. I always taught in synagogues. I taught here in the temple where the Jews always meet. And in secret, I have said nothing. I didn't do anything in secret. So why are you asking me? Ask those who have heard me what I have said. Indeed, they know what I have said. Right? When they were discussing all these things about he doing things unknowingly in secret, then Jesus said, I have spoke openly. So go and ask the people that heard me. Don't even ask me, go and ask them. They are my witnesses. And so they were not able to implicate Jesus on this particular charge of sedition. And so when he was speaking that way, so boldly and straightforward, one of the officers who was there, very unfortunately, one of the officers who was standing there, the guards, he said, do you answer the high priest like this? And he hit Jesus on the face with the palm of his hand. The treatment that Jesus was being given there was like a criminal. And so the bold answer that he gave, again, what we have to note is that Annas did not have a response or answer to what Jesus was saying. In fact, he did not want to engage anymore in the discussion with Jesus, because now he knew for sure that this person, if I tell something, he will tell what is in my heart. And he will tell why he has been brought here and what my intent was on this one. He can read my heart straight. What is in my heart? He is answering that particular question. And so Annas did not want to indulge anymore in a conversation with Jesus. Right? He tried his best. He tried to say that you are speaking against God, you are breaking the law, and things like that. But again, there is a problem with that. With the blasphemy also, they had to be very, very careful. Why? Because this is a trial. In a trial, and this is not even a trial, this is called a pre-trial, a preliminary trial, a trial before a trial. After this, he will be actually taken for the trial to the Sanhedrin, to in front of Caiphas. What they were trying to do is try to gather some information. But they wanted to gather information in such a way that it does not benefit Jesus. Now, if you go in depth into what Jesus said, he broke the law. Which law did he break? He broke the Sabbath, for example. Right? How did he break the Sabbath? He healed somebody on the Sabbath. Right? And so he broke a Jewish law. Now, that is okay, but if you want to investigate how did it happen, where did it happen, the fact that he was able to heal somebody will gain more significance than the fact that he simply broke a law. And for that, breaking the law, that would not attract a death sentence. Right? That would merely be a reprimand, a warning to the person. And so that would not serve their purpose. And so they needed to be very, very shrewd in the way. They did not want the trial to go on for too long. first thing. They want the trial to end that night. Can you imagine that? They wanted that trial to end that night. Why? Because the next day after that was Passover feast. So everybody gathered in Jerusalem for the Passover. And so there is going to be no more time for this trial. They have to wait one more week till the entire Passover week is over. Then only they will get their opportunity next week to again bring him back to trial, because everybody will be busy with Passover. Nothing will be going on. Everything closed. In meantime, people will wonder what happened to Jesus. His followers, his disciples will gain more people, and there might be disturbance. And so they may not be able to go through with the trial and go through with their plan. And so they wanted to hurriedly finish it as soon as possible. And that's why they took him to Annas first. Caiphas was not that experienced. Annas was very, very experienced. Right? And so they first went to him to make sure that he gives them some good ideas and everything what to do. And from there, what happened? From there, they took him to the Caiphas. Right? And Annas was again there. In the Sanhedrin also, they asked him to come there as well, so that he can also give some of his opinions and guide them a little bit as to how they can complete this plan of theirs. Okay, and so what does what happens there now? When they entered into the and so Jesus was taken now from the house of Annas, again bound. He was now taken to the main place in the court of Caiphas. Again, it is still midnight, past midnight, and they called a few people. They did not call everybody of the of council members. Not everybody was available. First of all, you cannot, according to the Jewish law, you cannot convene a meeting in the night. Right? There is no such precedent. There never happened before. And so they did not call everybody, because some people will object. Especially, there were two people who in the past also objected to the motives of the Sanhedrin. There were two people who were, what were their names? Two of the council members, Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea. Both of them objected and said, why are we not giving a chance for him to explain himself? Why are we bringing a charge against him without ever being able to prove anything? Right? Because according to the Jewish law, a person is deemed innocent until he is proved guilty. In this particular case, they have already predetermined that he was guilty. And from that standpoint, they are trying to build evidence, and they are trying to make up some evidence. Right? They bribed several people so that they come and give false testimonies. Just like how they gave money to Judas, they gave money to so many people. Right? That we are having a trial tonight. You come tonight, and we have to finish this tonight. But what happened to all those false testimonies? Let us see. Come back to Matthew 26. From 59 to 61. Matthew 26 from 59 to 61. Matthew 26, 59 to 61.
ప్రధాన యాజకులను మహాసభ వారందరూ యేసును చంపవలనని ఆయన విరోధముగా అబద్ధ సాక్ష్యము పెరుగుచుండెను. కానీ అబద్ధ సాక్షులు అనేకులు వచ్చినను సాక్ష్యమేమియో దొరకదు. తుదకు ఇద్దరు మనుషులు వచ్చి, వీడు దేవాలయాన్ని పడగొట్టి 3 దినములలో దానిని కట్టగలనని చెప్పనని.
You know, these false witnesses came, and then they were all kinds of things they were saying. He was saying that, he was saying this, but you know, these were false witnesses. One was coming and he was contradicting the other guy. Right? Jesus was just silent. He never said a word up till this point. Right? He was just silently watching the proceedings that were going on there. And all these people were coming. One was contradicting the other. And so all of these things were kind of invalid, right? Invalid false test, and they could not. Even some were trying to present a testimony. None of those things could work to condemn it with a death sentence. None of those things would really warrant a death sentence. Finally, one guy came, and his false testimony was, this fellow said, right, disrespectfully speaking about Jesus, he said, this fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and build it in 3 days. Right? Was this a false testimony, or did Jesus actually say this about the destruction of the temple and rebuilding it in 3 days? Wasn't this true? Why was this called a false testimony?
They thought that is blasphemy, right? So they.
But look at the statement very carefully. What does it say? They are saying, this man said, I am able to destroy this temple of God and build it in 3 days. What is wrong in what they have quoted? How they have quoted Jesus incorrectly. What Jesus said is, destroy this temple and I will rebuild it in 3 days. They twisted it and said, he said he will destroy this temple and build it in 3 days. Jesus never said, I will destroy this temple. He said, destroy this temple and I will build it in 3 days. What was Jesus talking about? He was talking about himself, right? The temple of God. He resides in that temple. So he is that temple that he was talking about. He was talking about his own death. You destroy this temple, you kill me, and I will come back, I will resurrect in 3 days. That's what he meant. They gave a false testimony and they twisted it and said, he said that he will destroy this temple. Jesus never said that he will destroy this temple. But Jesus stood silent as he was, this was the moment. This was the moment that the angels from heaven, everybody was watching so keenly, right? He was being mocked. He was being hit. People were bearing false witness against him. They were telling lies against him, all against Jesus, a person who came to die for those very people who were accusing him falsely. These people, all of them thought that Jesus was going to come in a divine way. He is going to come as the King of Kings and then present himself like that. For a moment, Jesus must have thought that this is the time I should show my divinity, and so that these people will know who is the Messiah. But they were totally blinded by their entire pride, and so Jesus still stuck to his plan. Right? At one gesture, the heavens, the angels would have come to rescue him from what was going on, the injustice that was going on there in the court of Caiphas. People talking all kinds of wrong things. Right? And so, the book of Mark tells us, if you see Mark 14, 58 and 59, right? There were two people who came and said that even that testimony did not agree. One person said, I will destroy it. One person said something else. When you're telling lies, when you tell multiple people, everybody will give their own version because they're not speaking the truth. And so when everyone is speaking the truth, it is going to match. Otherwise, it's going to contradict each other. Now, finally, they came to understand that no matter how many people we give bribe, they will never be able to give a testimony that is going to be sufficient for us in order to put Jesus to death. It's not going to happen. They tried for several hours and it did not happen. Okay. And so now Caiphas, who was the chief priest, he had to make the decision what to do next. Literally, there was no other way than to release Jesus because they came up with nothing. The only way, the only thing that they came up with, that Caiphas thought of, is unless Jesus implicates himself, I'm going to ask him some questions and let us see what he responds. Maybe through his responses, right? Right now, none of those witnesses are working. Jesus himself, let him speak and implicate himself. And then we'll find some fault with him. And these people, they heard several times from the people who were listening to Jesus and the priests who were there with Jesus regarding himself as the Son of God, as the Messiah, which these people rejected completely. But Caiaphas wanted to use that. And so, can someone read Matthew 26 from 62 to 63? Matthew 26, 62 to 63. What does he ask him?
ప్రధాన యాజకుడు లేచి, నీవు ఉత్తరమేమీ చెప్పవా? వీరు నీ మీద పలుకుచున్న సాక్ష్యం ఏమని అడగగా యేసు ఊరకున్నాను. అందుకు ప్రధాన యాజకుడు ఆయనను చూచి, నీవు దేవుని కుమారుడవైన క్రీస్తువైతే ఆ మాట మాతో చెప్పమని జీవము గల దేవుని తోడని నీకు ఆనబెట్టుచున్నానని. అందుకు యేసు నీవన ఇది మొదలుకొని మనుష్య కుమారుడు సర్వశక్తిని కుడిపారుసుని కూర్చుండుటయు ఆకాశ మేఘారులై వచ్చుటయు మీరు చూతురని చెప్పగా.
Amen. Thank you so much. So Caiaphas was saying, all these people are saying so much witness against you. Do you have nothing to say about all of this? And Jesus simply kept silent. And so he had to now ask a direct question. What was the question he asked? He said to him, I am putting you under oath of the living God. And so basically he's putting him under oath of his own father and asked him the question, tell us if you are Christ, the Son of God. Are you the Messiah? Are you the Christ, the Son of God? You know, there is a time to be silent and there is a time to speak. Jesus knew his time had come. But never, when placed under oath, especially about his father, if he had kept silent at this point of time, if he had denied why he was sent at this point of time, you know, that would go against the will of his father. There was no way he was going to let this opportunity go. He knew that the answer that he gave, if he gave it truthfully, that means death sentence for him. But yet, what did he say? He would but speak the truth, especially at a time where it was directly asked and his authority was being questioned. His entire mission to this earth hinged on this particular question. Everybody was watching him. All eyes were on Jesus. Complete silence everywhere. This was the ultimate question. And what was Jesus's answer? Jesus said to him, it is as you said. Yes, you have said it. But know this also, I am saying to you hereafter, right? After this particular incarnation of mine as a human being, after this, what are you going to see? You're going to see this Son of Man, who is also the Son of God, sitting at the right hand of the power and coming on the clouds of heaven. Two things he said, that there is going to be a judgment, and that judgment is given to whom? To Jesus. I am sitting at the right hand of power. That power is given to me. You put me under oath of the living God. The living God that you are putting me under oath of has given me that power of judgment. And that you will see him what? Come back in the clouds of heaven. You know, Caiaphas, those days there were two broad groups in the Jewish nation. Two sects. What were those two? Pharisees and Sadducees. Pharisees and Sadducees. The Caiaphas belonged to the Sadducee. Okay, this Caiaphas, who was the high priest, belonged to Sadducees. If you remember, do you remember one difference between the beliefs of the Pharisees and the Sadducees? I think we spoke some time ago. The main difference is the Sadducees only believe in the 5 books of Moses and do not believe in the concept of resurrection. They don't believe in the concept of resurrection, right? And so now Jesus talking about that there is going to be a judgment, that the dead also will rise, right? And then that they will be judged, the wicked will be judged, and that there is a life beyond that, hit very hard at the core of his belief, right? Because otherwise, what is judgment for? For the people who are dead, right? Unless there is a hope of resurrection. And so Caiphas at this, yes, so that he said, and at this Caiphas was the answer of Caiphas. Can someone read Matthew 26, 65 to 66? Yeah, 65 to 66.
65, 66.
Yes.
ప్రధాన యాజకుడు రక్తము చింపుకొని వీడు దేవదూషణ చేసెను, మనకిక సాక్షులతో పని ఏమి? ఇదిగో ఈ దూషణ మీరిప్పుడు విన్నారు, మీకేమి తోచుచున్నదని అడిగాను. అందుకు వారు, వీడు మరణమునకు పాత్రుడనిరి.
Yes. So, the Caiphas at this point of time, he was so upset with what Jesus said, with regards to what he said, that he rose up and then he tore his clothes. Back in the day, in the Jewish nation, whenever they are mourning or they are in horror about what is going on, the people used to tear their clothes. At the death of somebody, they would tear their clothes. But the high priest was, according to the law, the Jewish law, the high priest should never do that. The robe that is given to the high priest, the pure garments that are given to the high priest, because he is their representative to God. And so those were considered holy. And so he should not do that. Right? The high priest was exempt from all other things that others would tear their garments, except the high priest. High priest should never do that. There is no circumstance under which the high priest should do that. That was the law given by God. Right? But there was a man-made law in the traditions of the Jews, that in case of a sin of blasphemy, because you are expressing horror over the blasphemy that is going on, because the degree of blasphemy is so high, a man-made tradition allowed for the high priest to tear his garment. You see how these people, even at this point of time, the law of the man-made tradition took precedence over the law of God. He tore his garments. Right? But there is a huge significance to tearing those garments. Those garments were prescribed by God to the high priest. Why? Because those garments represented purity. Those garments represented the righteousness of God. Those garments were there on the high priest for a certain reason, that high priest was an intercessor, somebody who would represent God to them and them to God. Right? And so that was a very solemn duty that the high priest would do. Only the high priest could do that. Only he would enter into the temple and do that. Now, by tearing the garment, at this point of time, this is very, very symbolic of what happened at the death of Jesus as well, when the veil in the temple was torn into two. Right? To put an end to the sacrificial system, the veil was torn into two. Here, the garment was torn into two, stating that at this point of time, the status of a chosen nation of Israel had ended. No longer did God recognize the status of any of these people, high priests, anymore as his representative as his representative among the Israel nation. Right? It was he himself, and he himself tearing his garments proves the fact that Israel did it to itself. Israel themselves they tore themselves away from God and away from being a chosen generation. Israel was the the blessed nation, blessed among all the others. And by their rejection at this point of time, and what Caiaphas did exactly was what was going on in the hearts of everybody. They distanced themselves so much from the truth that no longer were they with God anymore. And those garments meant nothing anymore. They did not have any more significance anyway. God did not see the significance of those garments anymore. And so it was rightfully done that they were torn. Symbolically, that the relationship is over. And after tearing the garments, what did he say? He said, "He has spoken blasphemy," almost as to say, now we have caught you. I have asked a question to trap you, and you kind of fell into that trap. He has spoken blasphemy. And what was he saying? With probably a lot of joy, what further need do we have of witnesses? What further need we have of any more witnesses? He has himself implicated his own self, so we don't need any more witnesses. This is enough, right? What do you think he was asking everybody? And what were they saying? He is deserving of death sentence. That's what they were going for from the beginning. Try for death sentence. And so they thought that this blasphemy is death sentence, right? And then what did they do? Look at the mockery that they were doing. Please read Matthew 26, 67 and 68.
అప్పుడు వారు ఆయన ముఖము మీద ఉమ్మి వేసి ఆయనను తిట్టిరి. కొందరు ఆయనను అరచేతులతో కొట్టి, క్రీస్తు నిన్ను కొట్టిన వాడెవడో ప్రవచించుకోండి.
Jesus was going through such humiliation at this point of time in the court of Caiphas. When they felt that he implicated himself, somebody threw an old garment over the head of Jesus. It just fell over the head, covering his face, an old garment. And then somebody hit him with their hands. And they're telling, you are the son. You are saying that you are the Messiah, you're the Christ. Now you tell us who hit you. And then they removed that cloth and then they were spitting on his face. Jesus bore all this very, very patiently. Even when he was in the house of Annas, one person hit him on the face. What did Jesus say? Jesus did not retaliate harshly to him. Right? He only said, if I have said something evil, point that out to me, that I have said something evil. But if I have not said evil, why do you hit me? Right? Even now, even at this point where the very people for which he had come to give his life were mocking him, hitting him, spitting on him, falsely accused him. Everything that they could do, they are doing so that they ensure that he gets the death sentence. And even at this point, he remained. This is the prophecy that is there in the book of Isaiah 53. Right? He was silent and he opened not his mouth. Like how a sheep goes to the slaughterhouse, obeying, and then goes to be slaughtered there. That is how Jesus behaved. He opened not his mouth while they were doing all these things to him. We can only imagine what he was going through. There was loud noises. There was loud jeering that was going on. They were accusing him. They were yelling at him. People hitting him from all over the place, mocking him. And so while all this was going on, right, one thing that we have not come to yet, please go to John 18 and verse 15 to 18. John 18 verses 15 to 18. Something happens while all of this is going on inside.
సీమోను పేతురును మరి ఒక శిష్యుడును యేసు వెంబడి పోవచ్చుండు. ఆ శిష్యుడు ప్రధాన యాజకునికి నిలవైన వాడు కనుక అతడు ప్రధాన యాజకుని ఇంటి ముంగిటిలోనికి యేసుతో కూడా వెళ్ళాడు. పేతురు ద్వారం వద్ద బయట నిలుచున్నాను కనుక ప్రధాన యాజకునికి నిలవైన ఆ శిష్యుడు బయటకు వచ్చి ద్వారపాలకురాలితో మాట్లాడి పేతురును లోపలికి తోడుకొని పోయింది. ద్వారం వద్ద కావలి ఉన్న ఒక చిన్నది పేతురుతో, నీవును ఈ మనుష్యుని శిష్యులలో ఒకడు కావా అని చెప్పగా అతడు కాననింది. అప్పుడు చలివేయుచున్నందున దాసులను బంట్రోతులను మంట వేసి చలి కాచుకొనుచు నిల్చుండగా పేతురును వారితో నిలవబడి చలి కాచుకొనుచున్నది.
So, what was happening is when they were taking Jesus into the court of Caiphas, John and Peter, right? Here, Peter, the way John writes, is always very interesting. He says, Simon Peter followed Jesus and so did another disciple, right? John sometimes doesn't name himself here. And so many times he says, another disciple who Jesus loved, or another disciple who went. Instead of saying me, he used that another disciple. And so we identify that as John. And in fact, John was the one who knew quite a few people there inside the Sanhedrin. And so another disciple. So Peter and John went. Peter really wanted to go. John already knew some people, so he was able to enter into the court. Now that disciple was known to the high priest, and he went with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest. And so John went into the courtyard of the high priest. He could see Jesus. He could hear everything that was going on. They were so eager to see what was going on. But Peter stood at the door outside. Peter also was able to see, but he did not go into the courtyard. He was just a little outside near the door. Now the other disciple who was known to the high priest went out and spoke to her who kept the door, and then he brought Peter in. If you know some people, you can talk to them and bring them in. And so John knew the person who was at the door, and so he said, I know this person, so let him in. Then there was a servant girl who was keeping watch at the door in the night. That servant was the servant of Caiphas. And so she was there, and she knew that these people are very, very different from everybody else. And so she saw Peter and she said, you are not also one of these man's disciples, are you? Right? She fixed her eyes on Peter, and then she said, are you also one of these person's disciples? Because a lot of crowd gathered there, very interesting, with a lot of interest to watch the proceedings in the court, what is going on, right? But she was somehow able to make out the difference between Peter and all the others. The wrath and anger of all the others was very different from the countenance and the sadness that Peter had. And so, are you not one of his disciples? And what did Peter say? I am not. Peter did not want to reveal himself at that point of time. He knew the animosity that was going on there. He knew the shouting and the loud and all the witnesses that were going on there. He did not want to. He just was wondering what is going on and when will Jesus free himself? All the disciples, including Judas, all of them were waiting for only one thing, that something will happen inside. It cannot go on like this. A miracle will take place. All of those people will either drop or Jesus will simply come out victorious. He will unbound himself. So all of their focus was there. And in that, he did not want to reveal himself. And he said, I am not. And at that point, the cock crowed there. It was getting close to dawn. And during the dawn time, the cock crows. And Peter probably didn't hear it correctly the first time when it crowed. But, there were a lot of people who were, it was a pretty cold night. Usually in March, April in Israel, it's still very cold. And so at that point of time, they had firewood, and all of the people who came there to watch what was going on wanted to keep themselves warm. And so they started a firewood and they were all gathered there. Peter was at the door. He was watching for some time, but he was feeling cold. So he came back, and then he also wanted to warm himself. So he was sitting with all the others. What happened when he was sitting with all the others? Someone read, please, John 18:25 to 27.
సీమోను పేతురు నిలవబడి చలి కాచుకొనుచుండగా వారు అతన్ని చూసి, నీవును ఆయన శిష్యుల్లో ఒకడవు కావా అని చెప్పగా, అతడు నేను కాను, నేను ఎరుగనని. పేతురు ఎవని చెవి తెగ నరికెనో వాని బంధువును ప్రధాన యాజకుని దాసులలో ఒకడును, నీవు తోటలో అతనితో కూడా ఉండగా నేను చూడలేదా అని చెప్పినందుకు పేతురు నేను ఎరుగనని మరి ఒకసారి చెప్పని వెంటనే పొడుకుస్తుంది.
Right? So Peter, when he was there, all these people were, all of them, what they were discussing, Jesus has to be put to death. Jesus said this, Jesus said that, right? And all of them were against Jesus. When all of them were discussing, it was very easy for them to make out that this particular person, although he might be answering a question, yes, but he was not one of them. And so they would definitely could notice after a long time, after a lot of discussion was going on, that this person is different. And so one of them asked, are you not one of his disciples? You are, aren't you? And so second time, what did Peter say? I am not. The third time, this time there was more evidence. This was one of the servants of the high priest. He was a relative of the person who Peter cut off his ear, right? And so this person was actually there in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he witnessed that. And this person said, I saw you in the garden with him. Are you not that person, Peter? And this time, the book of Mark records this one. And I'll read it to you. The book of Mark says in Mark 14:71, and it also says, he said to Peter, you are one of them. Actually, even the way you're speaking also is not like the people in Jerusalem speak. You're speaking like a Galilean. And this man is also a Galilean. He came from Nazareth. Your accent and everything is from there. So definitely you are one of his disciples. Peter said he began to curse and swear. Can you imagine that? He started yelling at them, cursing them, and swearing at them, using bad language at them. And then said, I don't know who this man is whom you are speaking of. And then the cock crowed the second time. The rooster crowed the second time. Right? And this was the exact fulfillment of what Jesus said. Before the cock crows twice, you would have denied me thrice. The moment he heard, this time loud and clear, the rooster crowed, he immediately remembered what Jesus told him, that you would deny me 3 times, Peter. Peter had a clear view of what was going on in the court. The moment was there. I can totally imagine Jesus knew what was going on, and he probably looked at Peter outside, and Peter looked at Jesus. Jesus not looking at him angrily or saying, yeah, see, I told you. But, that is the reason. That is the reason Jesus, when he took Peter, John, and James with him in the Garden of Gethsemane to pray, he said, please watch here and pray with me so that you don't fall into temptation. That when temptation comes to you, you will remain strong. Had they prayed with him, along that, God would have given them, they would have received that strength where they would have stood strong and understood what Jesus' mission meant, and would not have had false expectations of what will go on there. And they themselves would have been boldly being able to proclaim that, yes, I was the disciple of Jesus. Peter, at that point of time, if somebody asked Peter, Peter, will you give your life for the person who was there inside? You know what Peter would have said? Yes. Peter, will you fight this battle, a physical battle for the person who is inside? You know what Peter would have said? Yes, I will do it. Peter would have gone to any length to defend Jesus Christ. But in small things such as this, when he was facing ridicule from the people around it, he did not think that was significant at all. He wanted to get out of that situation without being pointed at, without being ridiculed, without being outcasted from that place. Right? And that is so true in so many of our lives as well. Right? We, in our small social circles, in small things, right, we deny Jesus. We go to great lengths and we proclaim that we can do this and that is true. We will be able to do a lot of things for Jesus. Right? Preach here, preach there, go to this length, do that. But when circumstances present ourselves, where there is discomfort, we try to take a step back. Right? That is the faith that Jesus is talking about under any circumstances. Big, small, it does not matter. And had they joined him in prayer that night, they would have understood so much and they would have had the strength. Not just Peter. Right? All of them fled. All of them fled away. They all feared what is going to happen at this point of time. For one reason or the other, everybody went into their own direction. And the Mark 14:72. Can somebody read 14:72? Mark 14:72.
వెంటనే రెండవ మారు కోడి కూసాను గనుక కోడి రెండు మారులు కూయక మునుపు నీవు నన్ను ఎరుగనని ముమ్మారు చెప్పెదవని యేసు తనతో చెప్పిన మాట పేతురు జ్ఞాపకమునకు తెచ్చుకొని తలపోయిచూ ఏడ్చెను.
At this point of time, serious remorse for what he had done. Everything came back to his mind, that this is what Jesus said. And he could not stand there. He looked at the face of Jesus, what agony Jesus was going through, the injustice that he was going through inside. He looked at it, and this was probably the most painful part for Jesus, that one of his own, whatever was going on there, were all people who hated him, that were inflicting wounds on him, inflicting insults on him. But this probably would have hurt him the most when he looked in the face of Peter, where Peter, his beloved disciple, denied him. Right? And so Peter could not take that anymore, and Peter ran away from there. He simply ran away from there, crying and crying. He ended up in the Garden of Gethsemane one more time and remembered everything that Jesus did. How many times Jesus went there and prayed. And he remembered that this is where I saw my Lord, I saw my Jesus who was sweating blood right here. This is the meaning and why he went through such agony. Because of what he was about to go through. He was filled with remorse. He was filled with repentance for what he did. Crying, weeping bitterly. Right? Now, back in the palace, back in the court, there are more things that happen there. Right? After this, in fact, the next step for them was what? They could pass a judgment. They already passed a judgment that he deserves what? Death sentence. But remember, according to the Roman government rules, the Jews, maybe they can pass a judgment, but they cannot execute it. It has to be ratified by the Romans. Now, the Roman guards that were there, even outside the Sanhedrin was a very, very important place. Okay, it was the highest power. And so not only Jewish guards, they even had Roman guards. And so they were saying, there's nothing more to discuss here. Everything is over. He is death sentence because of the blasphemy. The Roman guards themselves had to remind those people, according to your own law, according to Jewish law, a person cannot implicate himself. somebody has to present that witness against him. Right? A person's implication cannot happen against his own self, and you will not be able to do the death sentence. This will have to be ratified by the governor. Right? And so the next chapter or the next phase of this trial has to be taken to the governor. Right? But before that, the night, I remember I told you that in the night they only called some of the people of the Sanhedrin, right? They did not call everybody because it was in the middle of the night. As soon as it was early morning, what happened? Let us go through the account of
You're done with chapter 26, right?
yes. I think I'm done with chapter 26. And do we have time, or should we do this? Yeah, just a few verses. Can we go to Luke 22? Now, this was mentioned by Luke. So go to Luke 22, please.
Verse
And from 66 to 71. Now, the morning had come. The moment the morning had come, what did the Sanhedrin do? Yeah.
ఉదయం కాగానే ప్రజల పెద్దలను ప్రధాన యాజకులను శాస్త్రులను సభకూడి ఆయనను తమ మహాసభలోనికి తీసుకొని పోయి, నీవు క్రీస్తువైతే మాతో చెప్పుమని. అందుకు ఆయన, నేను మీతో చెప్పిన ఎడల మీరు నమ్మరు, అదియు కాక నేను మిమ్మల్ని అడిగిన ఎడల మీరు నాకు ఉత్తరము చెప్పరు. ఇది మొదలుకొని మనుష్య కుమారుడు మహత్యము గల దేవుని కుడి పార్శ్వమున ఆసీనుడగునని వారితో చెప్పాను. అందుకు వారందరూ, అట్లయితే నువ్వు దేవుని కుమారుడువా అని అడగగా, ఆయన మీరన్నట్టు నేనే ఆయనను అని వారితో చెప్పాను. అందుకు వారు, మనకిక సాక్షులతో పని ఏమి, మనం అతని నోటి మాట వింటిమి కదా అని చెప్పారు.
So as soon as it was daytime, they called everybody, the elders, the chief priests, the whole 70 members of the Sanhedrin, called everybody. As soon as it was morning, they all came together, urgent meeting, come to the council. Now their only point that they were asking all night, they came to this conclusion that this is the only way we can implicate him. And so what they heard, few of them, they wanted everybody to hear. And so what question were they asking him? If you are the Christ, tell us. They wanted that only, that point. If you are the Christ, you tell us. But Jesus replied to them, if I tell you, you will by no means believe. You are not asking me so that you believe that I am Christ. So you're not going to believe that I am Christ. I know the intent for which you are asking me. And if I ask you, you will by no means answer. Any question that I ask you, also I know that at this point you are not going to answer me, or you are not going to let me go, no matter what, right? But know that hereafter, the Son of Man, once again, he repeats that, the Son of Man will sit on the right hand of the power of God, right? And so my power is given by God, not by you people. And I will sit at the right hand of the power of God. They were not interested in any of this one. Again, what did they ask the second time? They all said, are you then the Son of God? If you are talking about power of God, are you the Son of God? They asked one time in the night. He said yes. They asked the second time. He did not answer them directly. They asked the third time again, now in front of everybody. Are you the Son of God? And then he said to them, you rightly said that I am. Now they were satisfied. And now all of them shouted. They said, what further testimony we need? We can shut down this trial. The trial is done. For we have heard it ourselves, his own mouth, he is admitting it. That he is telling that he is the Son of God. So this is blasphemy. This deserves the highest sentence, which is the death sentence. And so this trial here can end now in the court of Caiphas and in the court of all those people. Right? Now this scene has to shift from here to the governor. Right? And so in the coming meeting, we will see the governor was a man called Pontius Pilate. What happens there in the governor's palace at that point of time? Right? Any questions?